people. Can I suggest we have 1 minute where you stand and stretch and whatever? Actually, while you're doing that, we could do a little New Zealand thing. So while you're stretching, just turn to the person next to you and say, Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Kia ora. And then,
So there's 2 steps to this. Well, I'm going to sing one. So the first one is that if you say Kia ora and you go, Kia ora,
Yeah.
and just lift your eyes a little bit, then they'll think, you're a local. So, Kia ora. Okay? Try that. There you go. Kia ora. You don't overemphasise the I, so it's not a Kia ora. Shut up. Kia ora. That one. And then this lady here said about the hongi. We won't do that, but that's a traditional one where you touch nose. No. It's actually like it's a part of it in the indigenous people, Māori people, and it's when the noses come together, you actually touch. You actually don't do that, but you just touch, and it's called sharing the breath of air, or sharing life, really. So you touch, and the breath comes through, and so you're sharing the same breath, and so it's quite a symbolic thing that is actually done. So and it's people talk about rubbing noses, but it's actually touch, breathe, and then you shared the same breath of life, so to speak. So that's but this one here is much more common. Kia ora. So kia ora, I'm not sure what it is in other. But it stands for hello, thank you, just about anything really. Kia ora. You say to it. How many of you have been to New Zealand? Anyone been to New Zealand? Right. You obviously have. And okay, so we've got a few. Can I also ask, how many of you understand English enough that can you understand what I'm saying, most of you? Oh, good. Because if you're relying on me to go into French...
maybe could you speak slowly? Slowly, because all of the people are not able to understand fast.
Don't speak too quickly.
You do this, New Zealanders speak quickly. That's part of what we do. So, just, thank you. Okay.
Do you want
the one just yeah, exactly.
Okay, so my presentation today is these 2 gentlemen from the US helped out there with the internet. We did a full evaluation of the boxing academies, and Paul and Michael came across as the international sort of advisory group. So this is part of theirs as well. Billy Graham. Okay, now Billy Graham is not the evangelist from America. Right? Billy Graham is a champion boxer from New Zealand. Now Billy is about this tall, and he was undefeated in his weight for many years, both in Australia and New Zealand. So he was a very good, well-known boxer within New Zealand. I can check my English. So when he finished, what had happened is that as a young man he had been very troublesome, and the police had actually picked him up at 12 because he had oranges, and he threw them at the police car and knocked the light off the top of the police car, and they chased him, caught him, and he was told he either went to Borstal, which is like a youth prison, or had to learn to go to box. So that was like the old story. He was dragged down, thrown into the boxing area, and the man, his boxing coach, took him into his house, looked after him, coached him all the way through, And so this Billy decided that when he retired, he would pay back. And so 12 years later ago, he set up his own boxing academy. It was initially for boys at risk, though in the last very short time, they've also brought in females. Now, Billy himself absolutely refused to have females because he had it old-fashioned, and it wasn't for boxing, it wasn't for girls. But he had a very feisty young woman said that she demanded that he set up it, and in the end he set up one of the academies, and he begrudgingly now accepts that that's okay. But it was a big thing for him to do that. So the classes, and I'll quickly explain how it's set up. There's 3 sets: fundamentals, juniors, and the seniors, and that's for the boys. The girls are only at that level because they've only just started. And a lot of the boys come through, boom, 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 though some of them, if they're brought in by the police, will get put into here. Okay, so sometimes the police will bring in boys and they say they need to go to this particular gym and they'll accept them. It's what, I don't know, do you know boxing gyms? Is this something that's, you've seen a Rocky movie and okay. So it's a matter, I'll talk about the girls later, but the boys, it is a masculine space. And that for me in education, where in New Zealand it's predominantly female, was quite a shock to me to see it was masculine. And when they came in, they physically worked them really hard. Now I'm, getting older, as you probably guessed, but I do go to the gym and I jog, and I'm in my mind I'm still 25, 21. When I saw what the boys did physically, I realised, it's just, they just hit the gym and the seniors for 2 hours, and they gather and they talk, and then they start and they skip, and the music goes and they skip 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 and they keep going, and then they do press ups and they skip straight into strength exercises. Then they go and they do these punching drills, and they punch and punch and punch, and then they go into sparring. So it's a physical, hard out physical space, lots and lots of exercise, and there's a real pride among the boys to be able to do that, and that's sort of part of that, the female as well, but the masculine thing of competing with each other and being strong and being fit. And many of the interviews with the boys, they talked about how proud they were and how fit they were, how strong they were. So there was a physical aspect to it. The sparring, most of the boys love sparring, but there was no pressure at all to spar. So there was a range. And some of the senior boys we interviewed, had never sparred because they didn't want to, but they'd been there for years. And we looked really, really carefully, and there was no, he doesn't spar stuff. It was accepted by everyone, and it was really interesting. The spars ranged from, they did, we call them closed pegs. What do you call them? Laundry clips. Put your washing on the line. Closed pins. So they put one on here, one on the partner, trying to get the clothes in. Or they put feathers in the hair. So they'd have a band around there and a feather, and they're trying to get the feather and trying to block the feather. So they would do that stuff for a while. We talked about the difference between males and females. The feather thing was interesting because the boys all put the bands on, got the feathers, and then they were like this. It was great. Then the girls' class followed. They put the bands on, and about half of them went straight over to the mirror. In the mirror. And then they were going to each other, and the coach was saying, girls, 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 girls. So, that was one of the little differences. It was quite funny, actually. Yeah, so boys can choose. There's skill teaching throughout. So they've got some older men there, about their 70s, who are sort of hard old coaches. but it's constantly, you know, just twist that foot when you're punching, working, and so there's a real dedication to skills. Okay, so it's not, they talk about it as being a positive youth development that uses boxing, but they are really, just like the TPSR model, they are committed to the skill of boxing and the physicality of boxing as well. Yep, that's right. So, be nice people being bilingual. So this, within New Zealand, the Billy Graham Boxing Academy is a high profile, and they were looking to get to expand, and so the government funded us to do this evaluation because the government wanted to know whether what was happening inside the black box, whether it was working, and most importantly, whether it could be replicated without this charismatic Billy Graham. Because he's larger than life, he's in the media, he's there. So they didn't want to put money into it until they found out whether these things. And so they were looking here at participations experiences. We had to complete an analysis of the training sessions, report on the views of the academy by the local community, and also offer recommendations for program changes. Now, this was not a TPSR program. Okay, this was a completely independent, but we used the tools of TPSR to evaluate it. And we also made a judgment of whether it was actually, how similar it was. It was much bigger than I'm going to report, but this was the overall data collection. Okay, lots of observations, lots of interviews. This was the TIA was the instrument that Sylvia talked about, and so too the PSRQ, youth experience survey, lots of questionnaires, etc. So we've got a lot of data in. This possibly was one of the more important ones because I chose to spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours in these gyms, cold as they were, and watching and just experiencing what it was. And one of the things that came out of it that we wouldn't have got from here was that it was a positive space. So you had lots of men there, lots of boys, lots of physical boxing, and I can say now that not once did I hear anyone swear. Didn't ever hear an angry voice, and I only saw and heard supportive comments among the boys and among the staff, among the coaches. So it was a split between a physical sort of aggressive boxing gym and a very nice supportive feel to it. And there was always crossovers where one set of fundamentals would finish and the juniors would come in, and the juniors would sit quietly and support the fundamental kids. And it really was a lovely space. And it always was funny to me that they were practicing boxing, beating each other up, punching bags, etc. But it was a very positive supportive situation. The first and major result was simply that. Okay, because they said they were a positive youth development. But at first sight, all you saw was really a whole lot of boxing. But at the end, we summarised and said, yeah, in real terms, this place had an absolute focus on values education using boxing, rather than this was a boxing situation that did some values education. Okay, and that was probably our major finding, because we wanted to know whether that was the reality. I'm not sure in here in France, but in New Zealand, every sport says they are about positive youth development, and they want funding for their soccer or their football or their rugby or whatever, and they say we do positive youth development, but usually that means nothing. They just run their sport and hope it happens. This one here was quite unclear that this was the result. Okay. Central to these academies was what they called was the passport to success, and that was a document, and it was created by Billy Graham himself, it was accessed by Billy Graham through a character development, something rather that he'd found. He'd used it with permission for the Passport to Success. And those there, the 8 values, life skills, were absolutely fundamental to what they did. Each of them, so if we look at, or any of them really, kindness would be defined in the Passport to Success, and then there was a series of examples of what they would look like in practice. Kindness is helping your mother at home, you know, when she needs help without being asked, etc. And the boys were asked to memorise them. So they would memorise respect, the definition, and then the examples of it in practice. When they'd memorised it, they then spoke it in front of the class, in front of the group, and if they got it right, they got a magnet with respect on it, and that they put on their lockers. When they got 8 magnets, they were then able to have a free membership to the Billy Graham Gym for life. So there was a real incentive. Now, one of the difference again between the girls and the boys, and it's probably the same in France, as soon as the girls came in, they all started swatting up and memorising. And so their lockers were covered in these magnets, and the boys had a couple, you know, so the boys were a bit grumpy about that, but the girls seemed to like memorising things or something. Yeah, so those were there, they were all around the room. That some of even the punching bags would have respect or honesty or whatever on them. At the start of the lesson, out of the session, when they gathered, they would usually talk about one of those, and at the end, they would allow them to talk about it, to discuss it, and then they would allow someone to stand up and do their reciting of one of the values if they could. Okay. Oops, let me get this right. The one thing that which is not TPSR related, which was different to TPSR, is that they did not integrate the values into the practice of the activity. They would refer to them if something happened, but they did not plan the activities deliberately to generate some of those values. Okay, so in TPSR, if we have, for an example, we were looking at cooperation or working together, we might have a warm-up where you've got several things they choose to do, and I'll often deliberately only put, say, 2 basketballs out. And so, of course, they'll grab the basketballs, but other people want to use them, and so they need to negotiate and learn to work together. So you plan to achieve the values, have something to talk about. They didn't actually do that deliberately. They ran their sessions as always. But if someone did something funny or different, then they would relate to them. Okay? So the values were there, but that was the only major difference. But they were, 5 out of 10. Okay. Oops, how do I go backwards?
Gotcha. It should be.
That says immediate.
Immediate success is the one we're trying to.
Okay. Good level of fidelity, are we right?
Yeah.
Okay, so there was a good level of fidelity, and that was really important because the government wanted to know whether this could be replicated without being a sort of a toxic mutation, as they say. And one of the gyms in the South Island had nothing to do with Billy Graham himself. They just used his program, and they had a very high level of fidelity. We did a whole lot of data to support that. So the first thing was that we can say that it was actually able to be replicated successfully. There was success at multiple levels, and there was a strong positive youth development focus. So the government ministry was really pleased about that, and we understand that that needed funding. Okay, now this is not perfect. There were some things that we suggested that needed to be looked at. I'll very, very quickly go over some of the successes. The increased confidence, fitness, making new friends, the relationships the boys had were lovely. and they made friends, and there was a constant thing about we're part of an Narrabah family. And for many of the boys we interviewed who were bullied at school, were lonely, that was really, really important. Okay, so they became, that did for some of them became their families. And so, honestly, some of the interviews with the young men would have you in tears. Some of the stories they talked about, what their lives were like, and for them this was a safe place. It was a secure place, and they had family and friends there, which was really important to them. Some of the self-control, fewer fights in schools. A lot of the kids were in there for either being bullied or were bullied. And so some of the bullies got into less fights, a lot of anger problems, instant retaliation as soon as they got teased or whatever, they immediately into fights. And they all talked about that being better and better and being able to actually control that better. Better focus on purpose, more positive attitude to the police. The police were involved in these academies. They came in, they had police officers working with the boys. They had a liaison officer who was there all the time. And so that broke down the boys' attitude to the police, but it also broke down the police attitude to the boys. And a number of the police officers said, oh, it's a bit hard. You see these kids, you think, oh, look, this is going to be problematic. But then you realise you've been boxing with them for the last 3 months, and so you've got much better relationships. So it worked both ways. And they reported doing better at school. Now, we didn't actually go, we tried, but we couldn't get that support or not. Oh, there's the police doing the kids differently there. Long term, there was definitely a feeling that they were breaking the circuit because it was a family rotation thing. The same families would have their kids and their kids with their kids. And the police felt that was breaking that cycle of harm in the families. Many of the boys envisaged positive futures. I think I can do, and a number of them end up as head boys at the schools, went off to university, etc. Not all of them, of course, but that gave them that potential. Aware of the time here. I'm not sure whether you know this work here. I'll put there. It's one way of assess whether a program is likely to be highly successful for values education. And you ask whether the values education is sequential, whether it's done in a sequence, okay? Whether it's immersed in their learning, so it's an active learning situation rather than just some posters on the wall talking. Whether it's focused, so in other words, sufficient time is given to it, and whether the values are explicit. And our judgment was that the Billy Graham gyms were not using the safe approach. They were focused and explicit, but they didn't do the other two. Okay, and that was one of the theoretical frameworks we made the evaluation on. And I thought I had the reference there, but I'm sorry I haven't. If anyone wants it, I'll ask if you can get that. And I've got 1 minute to go, I think. A couple of quotes. We heard that boys need good men in their lives so many times from the parents. Okay, they had men in their lives, some of them, but they're not good men. And many of the ladies, there's a lot of solo mothers there, and they would just be so pleased that their boys would have men in their lives that were good, men who looked after them, etc. This is a quote from Lily. You've now got 20 friends who are like family. They will look after you, and you should look after them. No one in this room should ever need to feel alone. And you could hear, it was like a pin drop. These boys are looking around and going, yeah. And they talked about at school looking after each other. Saying, oh, if my mate would do this, my friends would do that. But there was a sense there that it was an emotional situation. That there, when I listened to that, was very emotional because the boys, I don't know what had happened, but it really hit them. From the parents, I'll put them both up because of the time. These are unsolicited from the parents. Oh, no. Oh, it's up there. Kia ora.
Il vous reste 3 minutes, on aurait le temps peut-être pour une question, deux questions. Je vous invite aussi par la suite à venir me parler avec les présentateurs si vous souhaitez interagir plus personnellement. So one, two questions, one question.
Dans le monopoliser la parole. I need information about the educators, the teachers who implement the program of how many have been teach themselves.
None. No, all boxing coaches or young men who wanted to do boxing, and they might have a university but no teaching.
Parce que s'il y a plusieurs éducateurs, ils ne peuvent pas faire exactement la même chose, c'est ça la question que je pose. Mais pour toutes les études d'ailleurs, hein, je pose cette question-là.
They're not doing all the same thing, so they're not the same. So it's a program or something.
Oh, similar, very similar, yeah. Not exactly, but similar, yeah.
And
And there was a fundamental program, yes.
how many different coaches or educators did the program have?
One gym had Billy, his son, and 3. The other gym had Natu and 2. And then Ashburton had Cornelius 2. Yeah, that was a small one. I should say actually, if anyone is interested, I've got the full evaluation, which is about 30 page, of the boxing academies, and just flick me an email and I'm happy to send you. I'll just send you the document, PDF, and it's much more detailed than that. Any other questions? Yeah, so please send an email if you want the evaluation report. Thank you.